Welcome to Wise Wednesday, the podcast that goes beyond the highlight reel to uncover the real stories, the setbacks, the pivots, the long nights, and the moments that make it all worth it. Hosted by Jacob Britton, each episode features honest conversations with creative professionals, entrepreneurs, and out-of-the-box thinkers. Together, they explore not just what these guests do, but how they got there, what they've learned along the way, and the hard-earned wisdom that shapes their journey.
Hello. Welcome back to Wise Wednesday, the podcast where we try to go beyond the highlight reel and talk about the real stuff, the struggles, the pivots, the late nights, the moments that make it all worth it. I, of course, am your host, Jake Britton, and each week I sit down with different creatives, professionals, small business owners, and out-of-box thinkers to unpack not just what they do, but really how they got there and what they've learned along the way, the wisdom they've picked up. And today's guest is the definition of a modern maker. Mr. Adam Fox is with us from Fox Woodworking. He is, of course, a woodworker, but he's more than that. He's a storyteller, a content creator who's turned this relentless entrepreneurial spirit into deep respect for craftsmanship into a thriving business and online brand. With a background in marketing and over 40 job titles in his rearview mirror, Adam brings a wealth of lived experience into everything he builds, from custom furniture to my favorite, the relatable, no bullshit social content that really resonates. Adam, welcome, man. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, man. I'm excited to get into it and talk a little bit about my background.
Awesome. Well, yeah, and we want to dive right into it, right? At Wise Bear, we try to do no fluff marketing. It's all about getting into the good stuff and providing our clients with a strategy that is no fluff. So that's kind of the goal of this podcast is let's talk about the journey, but then let's get into the good stuff, the struggles that people want to hear about that you've kind of conquered, and then also hopefully leave them with some marketing wisdom to take and apply to their own small business. So you mentioned 43 job titles, right? There's a lot. And I think I've had like 10, the marketing agency world and the marketing kind of cornered me, but you're kind of opposite, right? You started in marketing. Tell me about, kind of your background in that shift from marketing into, I guess, a full-time woodworker, right? What clicked and how did that get going?
Yeah, I graduated from Central Michigan University with a marketing degree and a Spanish minor back in 2010. And I really always wanted to go into the advertising world. I was always interested in advertising. And I think the way that my brain works, like I was super interested in the tactical side of things, in the strategy behind the decisions you make and the things you do and how those contribute to your business. And after I graduated, I was having kind of a hard time breaking through into the advertising field. It's, if you want to work for an agency, it's tough if you don't intern with the agency, if you don't do an advertising specific degree. So I've always been a hustler. I've always been a survivor, and it was just about getting a job. After I graduated, I moved into a logistics job as a freight broker, and I started chasing trucks around the country, basically. At first, I didn't really utilize that marketing degree for what I wanted it to be, but I was doing it to survive. That job gave me the opportunity to move to Chicago. And my goal in moving to Chicago was, okay, I'll keep doing this logistics work and kind of transition and hopefully, start up those connections with the advertising world and try and get into an agency in Chicago. And ultimately, it just never really worked out. As I got more experience in logistics, people kind of wanted to pigeonhole me more towards being a broker, a freight guy, and it wasn't working out. So I spent about 5 years in Chicago, and if you're familiar with the brokerage lifestyle, it's very similar to like a trading room floor. It's a grind. You're there 10, 12 hours a day, or answering a few hundred emails a day, taking calls all day long. It just kind of wasn't for me. So I left the logistics world And I actually got a job in purchasing department for a high-end cabinet company in one of the Chicago suburbs. That was kind of my first experience related to the woodworking side of things. It was interesting to be in a shop every day. Now my job had nothing to do with the actual woodworking itself. It was more just procurement. So it didn't really give me any practical experience as far as building things, but it was an interesting position to see how a company that operated at the level that they did operates, and those are skills that I still use in my business today, procurement of the right material at the right cost, getting things on time and stuff like that. Those are skills that, are fundamental skills that I use every day. So I did that for about a year and quickly realized that, the office life really wasn't for me. At that point, I'd been about 6 years doing office work, being inside all day and that kind of thing. I was looking for a change. So after that, I kind of chased a dream, and my now wife, who was a recent new girlfriend at the time, supported me in this. I moved out to California to be a ski bum. So I went from living in Chicago, making decent money, to packing up what I could fit in my truck and driving across the country to teach skiing for $10 an hour. That was quite the transition. It was kind of crazy to make that move and take that leap and just trust myself that I was going to figure it out. So, I started working.
While we're talking about that ski resort piece, I'm just curious, so the viewers can get an idea of like the timeline here. How old were you when you made that leap and kind of transitioned from this full-time, more or less corporate job to packing up the truck and headed west?
Yeah, that would have been 2014. So I would have been like late 20s. I would have been 26 or 27.
Got it. So you packed up your stuff, you headed west. Now you're living in Northern California at a ski resort, being a ski bum. How did that time kind of help shape maybe some of the approaches that you take currently, especially with like your online business and the content and storytelling that you do today?
Yeah, so I got out west and I started teaching every lesson that I could, making $10 an hour. Luckily, I had a place to stay that was very cheap, so I could afford to do it. And while I was out there that year for Christmas, my wife bought me a GoPro for Christmas, and I started goofing around, between lessons with my buddies, shooting video on the mountain, kind of utilizing that marketing degree perspective. In high school, I'd done some video projects class and I was in journalism and that kind of stuff. So, I kind of had a pretty good idea or a good eye for, good content. And I started shooting videos around the mountain and just posting them on my personal YouTube and Instagram. And the mountain got wind of it, and they kind of, the marketing department approached me and said, "Hey, we didn't realize you had a marketing degree. Are you interested in working in the marketing department?" And I said, "Yeah, absolutely. Why not?" So they created a role for me. My title at the time was, what was it? It was, I don't recall exactly what it was. It was kind of digital content manager or something like that. But it was an awesome upgrade because, it was full time. It was salary. It was year round, which, versus a normal ski instructor is a seasonal position. So like it allowed me to stay there rather than having to leave and try to figure out a summer job or something. And I kind of just started building programs around, building content and telling stories and using those to advertise the resort I worked for. So it was an interesting position because it was an independently owned ski resort. Most ski resorts these days are owned kind of by, giant corporations, and they're all managed by, there's a couple major corporations that own most of the ski resorts in North America. And we were independent, so we didn't have the resources of those guys. We had basic equipment. Working in the marketing department, I worked as a lifty when there was too many that were sick. I worked at the ticket counter when somebody would call in, So I wore a lot of different hats, but I really got to stretch my legs on the creative side and create content and campaigns, built around this like authentic voice of being an independent ski resort in an industry full of corporate companies. So it really gave me an opportunity to like kind of curate the voice of what the skiing experience at our resort was. So it was awesome. I got to put that stuff together. I got to produce content. I managed the website content, and I got to ski around with my buddies and shoot pictures and video. Like, that's a dream job. It doesn't get much better than that.
I'm sure like chasing that dream, right, comes with some, some fear, some apprehension, and you kind of just went for it, right? Packed the truck, head west, and I mean, and man, it really sounds like it gave you a great opportunity to start using your degree for what sounds like a great, creative space that supported you and some of those endeavors. But, I know that everyone, right, faces like these kind of like, I don't know if I should do this. It's scary. I'm going to stick to the safe job, right? How has like overcoming that fear, you know, fueled your growth as a content creator and as a business owner today?
Yeah, I mean that's something that I talk about pretty often is the fear, if you want to say it, and like it's something I talk about when I reference what I do on a daily basis now as a woodworker. I'm a firm believer that 95% of people could do anything that I do on a given day. It's just about fear of failure, and like from very early on, I was confident that I would figure it out and I would make it work. And like the whole story arc of working at the ski resort is a perfect example. I showed up, I'll make $10 an hour and work my butt off and, get recognized for my talents. And before I know it, I've got one of the coveted positions at any resort of having full-time salary benefits, the whole thing. Overcoming that fear is kind of like a muscle. In my opinion, you have to exercise it, you have to practice it, you have to get better at it. But really, the fear of failure just holds people back so much. And it's like, at the end of the day, if you fail and you learn something, is it really a failure? I don't know. I don't think so. So, that's how I describe my entire woodworking career is just a series of failures that brought me to success. So yeah, it's an interesting ideal when you approach it that way. You just have a different mentality about it.
So you're working at a ski resort out west. When does this like moment of like coming back to West Michigan and actually starting Fox Woodworking? Just kind of fast forward to that pivot.
Yeah, so if we jump forward a little bit, working at the ski resort, I had met a guy who was interested in opening a bar, restaurant, music venue near Mammoth Mountain, which was a little bit south of where I was living at the time. So he recruited me as a part owner. I was the only one on the team that had any kind of building experience, and I've worked on projects for my dad since I was, 8 years old, and it's just so I was the only one with any kind of construction experience. And we bought this old building and it needed tons of work. So I kind of became the de facto project manager. But being in the mountains, there's like a limited amount of tradespeople that are doing the things we need. So we would go out and try and find a painter to paint the building. And it's like we'd get these ridiculous quotes and we're like, yeah, we can't afford that, man. We're a startup. We bought the building, we're doing the branding, we're doing music, the whole thing. And it's like, how much do they quote? All right, make sure there's a keg in the cooler and give me 10 gallons of paint in a weekend and it'll be painted by Monday. So that really kind of got me back into touch with building things and putting my hands on things. And just, you know, at that point, I was coming up on 10 years away from Michigan. And I'd never been able to afford a space that gave me room to like work on stuff or build because I've always done woodworking stuff as a hobby on the side. But now I'm kind of thrust back into this position where I get to build stuff again. I'm like, man, I really love this. And so we opened the bar and restaurant, ran it for almost a year, and it was just time. Living in California is tough, housing is tough, so there's always a question of where am I going to live, and it's just kind of a stressful thing. And my girlfriend at the time, wife now, and I were like, we want to buy a house, but we can't afford to buy a house in California. And we looked at it and there were houses in Michigan that were still affordable. And we were like, both of our families are still here and we wanted to get married. And it was like, it just kind of feels like the right time. So we made the leap and moved back about 5 years ago.
And so, you kind of made this decision, right? Like at some point along your way, Fox Woodworking, became open, and you probably had opportunities to maybe go back to logistics or maybe work for another type of resort or event venue. What made you say, nah, I'm not going to, climb somebody else's ladder. I'm going to build my own?
Yeah, so we moved back, and I had just come off being essentially self-employed, owning my own business in a minority respect. Um, I was trying to be picky about what I wanted to do, and for me, I've got a big skill set from those 43 different jobs I've had. So there's a lot of things that I can do, uh, but I'm motivated by passion. So it's trying to find something that I really care about, that I'm passionate about, that I want to invest my time in to make better. And I applied for jobs at breweries and distilleries. I applied for jobs at ski resorts in Michigan. Just nothing was really working out. So I needed something to stay busy because I'm not a guy that sits around and does nothing. So I was back home. My dad's shop was available to me. So I started so we started buying tools, and I've never had the resources to go out and buy the nicest, best, top of the line tools or anything like that. So I'm just kind of like a Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist deal shopping hustler, So I started buying used tools, started building stuff again. Um, and I kind of found this guy in Chicago visiting some friends that was selling wood bowling lanes. So um, I started buying bowling lanes from this guy. I messaged him and said, "Hey, how much for 10 or 20 feet?" Thinking I'll make, a couple conference tables or dining tables or whatever it might be. And he replied and said, "Hey, I'll make you a much better deal if you buy an entire lane, 60 feet." And I kind of said, "Okay, well, do you care if I try and sell it back here in Michigan?" And he's like, "As long as you show up with cash, I really don't care what you do with it." So I bought 60 feet, a full lane, went down with an old rusty pickup with way too many miles on it and a trailer with a bent axle. And I had my first 60 feet sold before I got it home. So the next weekend I went back and bought two lanes, 120 feet. And then the next time it was 300 and 700. And it just kind of started spitballing. And I was buying and selling this bowling lane. And people started asking, "Hey, do you do custom work? Can you do a kitchen island? Can you do kitchen counters? Whatever." I've been a handy guy forever, never any like formal woodworking training. And I was like, "Yeah, I can figure it out. Yeah, let's do it." So I started on taking on projects. And at this point I was working in the Dr. Pepper warehouse in Holland as a picker, which is kind of a crazy job. It was second shift and just very physical, and but I needed benefits. I needed insurance. I was working there and doing the woodworking thing as a side hustle, and it got to the point where I was like 6 months out on taking custom orders, working nights and weekends. I went to my wife, who's like a saint and has supported me through all this craziness, and she was like, uh, "If you can pay your bills, I don't care what you do." And I was like, "I think I can make a run at this. Let's do it." So it was August of 2020, kind of peak COVID. I quit my real job and became a full-time woodworker. And that's, coming up on 5 years now being a full-time woodworker. And it's been an incredible experience.
That's awesome. And I love just the story of going for it, right? It never gets old, right? It's like the old American dream, like
Yeah.
figuring out that, okay, yeah, I have this skill set. Yeah, I'm kind of handy. Seeing this opportunity with bowling lanes and kind of starting there and then like sharpening your skill set along the way. And, I've seen some of the work you've done here in West Michigan and beyond. Oh, it looks like we lost a camera. Oh, well, I see some of the work you've done here in West Michigan and beyond and all these different businesses. And it's awesome. It's really is next level. So it's cool. I didn't realize that you had like kind of just started doing this on a professional kind of scale until pretty recently, right? I kind of just assumed that you were like this woodworker all along. And it seems like you really had to like figure out a lot along the way. So I want to get into like the practical wisdom part, right? It's Wise Wednesday. We're trying to help small businesses with their own marketing. And I think like what one of the things that I've noticed with Fox is what you do is you are putting out this fun, relatable content. You are have a really strong, brand voice. And it seems like you, Adam, have a kind of philosophy around building an authentic brand. What's your advice to maybe a small business owner who's still like just trying to find that voice, right? Trying to build a brand, but doesn't have that voice yet. What's your take on that? Where can they start?
Yeah, it's a tough thing to do if it's not familiar to you. So what I always have done in the past is you got to try some stuff out, try some different things that are maybe a little bit outside your comfort zone. And, as you do that, you're going to be able to see what content and what voice people engage with, and, doing some analytics on how your posts perform and what your engagement rates are and stuff like that. You're going to be able to tell pretty quickly what are the things about your business that people respond to. So, my advice is to kind of get outside the box, think about things a little differently. But at the end of the day, the most important thing in my book is to be authentic, to be yourself. People are so good at recognizing if you're pitching something, or if you post something with a salesy tone. People see that and it's so disengaging. And people are so overwhelmed with ads on social media platforms these days. It's like, do I want to follow another account that's just going to be posting like, oh, I got this for sale, or oh, buy this, or try this product? Like, no, like we've got enough of that in our lives. And I think, you know, as somebody who builds things, as somebody who's a maker, what people buy from me, you're ordering a dining table, but you're ordering my hands on it, right? You're ordering my work, my time, my experience, my point of view. So like I pretty quickly realized that my product isn't just furniture. There's thousands of companies out there that can make similar furniture. What you're buying is me. And so for me, the best way to pitch that and to sell that is to tell you about what I do, tell you about my favorite tools, tell you about how I tackled a problem or an issue, show you my works in progress and things that aren't perfect and completed. That's my voice. I'm just sharing my journey, learning this business and this craft as I go. And that authentic voice sells more than paid advertising can do or anything else. So, for me, it's just about being authentic. It's about being myself. And that's the brand.
I think it's great advice. And like, we always preach, right? Authenticity is, beats polished perfection every time, right? It really does. Sometimes I got to take my own advice. You talked about, salesy posts and stuff. Like, I'm guilty of that because like it's this content hungry machine out there that is like social media, that is all these different marketing platforms, and you're just constantly feeding the machine. And I think as small business owners, even though it's like what I help other people do, like I can get a little complacent with it. I can get a little bit lazy with it. And, just to produce a piece for the sake of producing a piece, just to get it out there. Right. And I think it's hard sometimes to find balance when you're working the job, documenting the job, editing it, posting it. If we're talking about videos, writing the captions, everything in between. How do you find time? How do you balance, your craftsmanship and the content that you produce?
Yeah, it's a tough balance. It's a lot, and all that stuff is another craft in and of itself. And I'm lucky that I've had experience where that was my job and that's only my job, so I'm pretty proficient at it. But another thing that I like to talk about is it's a French philosopher Voltaire's quote: "Don't let perfection be the enemy of good." So not everything that we post or produce needs to be perfect, professional quality. We don't need to hire film crews for every single post and stuff like that. I think it's important to do a balance. I recently did an interview where I did bring in, professional videographers that have much better equipment than I do, and lighting and sound and stuff like that. So that's a part of the mix, but shoot a video on your phone, it's the technology is so good that it's easy. And not only that, the lifespan of most social media posts is so short. It's not like it's going to be there forever. And once the engagement goes down on it, then it disappears from the algorithm, and it's like it's gone. So in that same vein of trying things out, just try some stuff out, and if it's not perfect, don't let it be the enemy of good. Just try it out and see what happens. And I use that as a mantra every single day. Don't let perfection be the enemy of good.
I think that's good. Now, as far as like content creation goes, is this something that you're doing on a daily basis? Do you schedule it out? Do you kind of just pick up your phone, as you're going, like, oh, this could be cool? Or do you have much of a strategy there? Or are you kind of just, throwing what comes to mind as it comes to mind?
As a guy that has professionally built campaigns, I wish that I had more time to dedicate to actually developing plans and schedules and sticking to that. As a small business owner, it's really hard as a sole proprietor to like keep myself accountable to those schedules. So I've just found that it just is kind of off the cuff. And sometimes when I get really hectic and really busy, the social media presence gets a little neglected. But ultimately, yeah, I think there's something that I do almost every day that's interesting on some level. And so, my phone's always in my pocket. So snap a picture, shoot a little video, even if I don't end up using it, I have it to use later. And it's just, if you look through my Google Drive, there's just hundreds and thousands of pictures of wood and tools and stuff. And just sometimes if I'm like, oh, I need to post something and I don't have anything interesting from the last week or so, I'll just go back in the archive and be like, hey, this was a great picture. Like, let's stylize it a little bit, write a little caption, and kick it out there. It takes 10 minutes. Um, yeah, it's something that I try to do every day, even if I don't use it every day.
I think that's good advice too. And it's like, I think, not to put you in the same category, but like I work with a lot of like service, based industries, right? I work with a lot of concrete guys, landscapers, general contractors, these are good old boys, right? Like they're busy with the work, with landing clients, and they're the sole proprietors, they're slammed. And honestly, a lot of them don't want to be in front of the camera. They don't want to get out there and show their face or show behind the scenes. One, because they don't have time, and B, because they're uncomfortable. I just built a website for a concrete guy, and like I need some photos, right? I need some photos of people, workers doing it. And he sent me like, a bunch of cell phone photos of just finished concrete, which, yes, you need that, right? But people do want to see the people behind the scenes that are actually laying the concrete, or in your case, building the custom woodwork display for the new cafe or what have you. What would you say to, one of those guys, the good old boy who's probably scared to get out, scared to put themselves online? Would you give them any advice, knowing what you know as both a content creator with that professional backbone, background, but also being a small business owner yourself?
Yeah, I think, if you look at any crew, and I would guess that 100% of your concrete guys have a guy on the crew that's a goofball, that's a funny guy, that's got stories, that's got, an interesting personality. And I would say that 95% of any business, there's that guy there. Find that guy and use that guy. Be like, hey man, I want to put you on the clock. We need to shoot a video about this. This is what we want to talk about. Kind of coach them a little bit, but really use that personality, and that feeds into that authenticity too. Like, this is a guy that might be on your job site, and if you can share that with people ahead of time and say, hey, this is Steve. He's been with us for 12 years and he loves flat work or whatever it is. People see that person, and then that person's going to be at their home and they're like, hey man, I saw you on the website, I saw you on social media or whatever it is. It doesn't have to be your face, and but I still think you can tell those stories using the people that are a part of your business, and it engages that employee too. It makes them feel valued. It makes them feel like, hey, what I'm doing isn't just running a trowel or dumping concrete in a form. I'm contributing to the business in some way. I think that's good for engagement on the employee side. It's good on the customer side, and it's just interesting.
Yeah, I like that you brought up the employee side too, because, obviously maybe you as an owner don't want to be in front of the camera, but I do think a lot of employees appreciate the shout out, right? Just the mention of their hard work and appreciation, whether it be employee spotlight post or a quick story of Earl, that may be. I think it's super, super important to give them some credit where credit's due, right? Especially if you have a team out there doing your thing. So use that as an opportunity to create some content, but also, show your employees some recognition that they most likely deserve. So we're wrapping up here, Adam, and I want to be respectful of your time because I know how busy you are. Opportunity for a shameless plug, something that you're learning, exploring right now, maybe something that you're working on that's upcoming. I saw that you're even doing some like cutting board classes and doing some fun stuff like that. What is Fox Woodworking doing these days?
Yeah, the woodworking classes are really cool. And they were kind of born out of like the perfect combination of what my brand is and what I love to do. So the woodworking classes, I've done maybe 8 or 10 of them, and they came from this idea that I've been making cutting boards. I save all of my scrap. I don't waste anything. That ties in perfectly with my reclaimed business model. And so you get to a point where you have so much scrap that it's overwhelming. So I was making cutting boards, but it's really tough for me to compete on cutting board price because it's a very simple project. Anybody with a couple clamps and a saw can make a cutting board, and they look great. They're awesome. They're custom. You can make them whatever size you want, blah, blah, blah. So I wasn't selling a lot of cutting boards because they were too expensive. I got rent to pay. I got to keep the lights on. I got overheads. I kind of had this idea to make it an experience rather than just buying a product. I started doing these classes. I probably taught about 65 people how to make cutting boards in the shop here. I've got enough sanders and clamps and tools and blah, blah, blah. And people come in. I've got blanks set up. They select their blanks. They make their design. We glue them up. We go out to breakfast. And they get to go home with a fully finished cutting board. That's the same price as what I would have sold it. And I get to teach them how to do it. I get to share my passion. And like the brilliant marketing part of that is now all these people have a day's worth of experience with me. And those people go out to their communities and they become advocates. They say, hey, I took this cutting board class at Fox Woodwork, and this, Adam taught us how to do this, and it was really cool, and he was making jokes, and he's like, and there's a woodworker, and so it's this kind of like very organic guerrilla marketing effort of like having a great experience with these people in my shop, which is, to the average person is like this amazing place where things are created, and cutting them loose to go back out in the world and talk about the experience, and it brings business in. I get referrals from it. It's been really fun, and I love teaching people. It's just, teaching skiing, teaching woodworking, very similar. I love doing it all.
I love that, man. And I call that marketing gold right there. When you rolled out that event and I caught wind of it, I still need to sign up for one myself because I think it would be really cool. But yeah, marketing gold because it's a way to interact with the community that your business is in, get them involved, get their hands dirty. You're getting that, street cred, if you will. And you're also getting user generated content throughout it. People taking photos, tagging you in their socials, etc. So it's just an absolute win-win. So nice work on that. And I'm excited to check out a class myself. So um, we do a couple of things here as we wrap up. You mentioned a couple of great things like that don't let perfection be the enemy of good. Just the emphasize of, not being afraid to try and take some of those risks and power through that muscle memory of fear, right? If you had to boil it all down, right? Everything that you've learned in this 57 million jobs, experiences, the ski bum, coming back to Michigan, starting your business, but you got to boil it down professionally, personally, and creatively into just one truth at this point of your life. What would that truth be?
Oh man, that's a tough question, and I knew it was coming. I liken a lot of my experiences in my life to the idea that, as reckless as it seems, sometimes you've got to jump off the cliff to see if your parachute works. Sometimes you just got to go for it. Uh, I take on projects every month that I have no idea how I'm going to do them. I have no idea, but I can figure it out. I'm confident in my skill set. And sometimes you just got to have that confidence, a little bit of overconfidence, the willingness to work hard to figure it out. And you just gotta go for it sometimes.
I love that, man. And thank you again, Adam, for being here. I appreciate all the wisdom that you dropped, as well as just, background, sharing that story the way you did. And thanks for being authentic, man. Thanks for coming on and just being yourself. I look forward to continuing to work with you on the professional level, but also just to get in and get my hands dirty and build a cutting board one of these days. So, yeah, thanks again. And thanks to all our listeners for tuning in. Next week, we have Phil Carroll. Phil Carroll is a freelance photographer focused on portraits based out of Detroit. He's going to come in and talk to us a little bit about what he's been up to and the journey that he's taken to get here. So, Adam, thanks again. And we'll check in with everyone next week.
Thanks for having me.